Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are waiting for people to join us in from the waiting room, which sometimes takes a few moments. So we're just taking a few moments to let people get in and filter in. My name is Sarah Higgins, and I'm the editor and artistic director of Art Papers. And as we take a few more moments to let people kind of filter in from the waiting room, I'm just going to start with a little bit of general information. Art Papers is an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization with a mission to provide accessible forums for contemporary art and culture. We do this in print, online, and in person through our quarterly magazine on artpapers.org and with our live programs. If you'd like to keep up with our upcoming events and receive updates about our latest interviews, essays, and reviews, we invite you to sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's possible to do that also on artpapers.org. And as people are joining us, I just want to welcome you all for this program, Art Papers Live with Diana Al-Hadid. Art Papers Live is Art Papers' signature series of free public lectures featuring creative thinkers and cultural leaders from around the world. AP Live is made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, Fulton County Arts and Culture, City of Atlanta Office of Cultural Affairs, and by our institutional partners. In this case, Georgia State University, Welch School of Art and Design Gallery, where Diana Al-Hadid's solo exhibition, Nothing is Stable, is currently on view. This talk will be followed by some time for questions from the audience. You're welcome to enter questions in the Q&A field, which is down the bottom of your Zoom window. You can do that during the talk or once the Q&A session part has begun. And you should be able to also watch as questions pop up by opening that field. It'll create a little pop-up. Finally, the talk will be made available with closed captioning on artpapers.org in the coming days. So now, hopefully, everyone has joined us. And I'll hand things over to Welch School Gallery Director, Cynthia Parnell.
Thank you, Sarah, and to Art Papers for collaborating with us. Diana's talk is supported by Georgia Humanities in partnership with the Georgia Department of Economic Development through funding from the Georgia General Assembly. The exhibition, Diana Al-Hadid, Nothing is Stable, is supported by Georgia State University student activity fees, the Center for Collaboration and Innovation in the Arts, the Middle East Studies Center, and the Atlanta Global Studies Center. The exhibition will be open to the public in the Welch School Gallery until March the 5th. Please reserve your free time tickets on Eventbrite and follow us on Instagram at GSU_Art Design Gallery. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Associate Professor of Art History, Susan Richmond.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you to Art Papers for hosting this event and to our virtual audience for joining us this evening. Our speaker, Diana Al-Hadid, was born in Aleppo in 1981 and currently resides in Brooklyn. She holds a BFA in sculpture and a BA in art history from Kent State University and an MFA in sculpture from Virginia Commonwealth University. She also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Last year, she was honored with an award for distinction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and a trailblazing award from the Bronx Museum with architect John Lott. She's participated in numerous exhibitions worldwide, including recent biennials in Rabat, Morocco and Lahore, Pakistan. And has had solo exhibitions in Oslo, Vienna, Abu Dhabi, and museums across the United States. Her sculptural installation, Allegory by a Thread, is currently on view at the Hans Memling Museum in Bruges, Belgium. And she has 2 solo exhibitions coming up this year in Mumbai and Seattle, respectively. If you find yourself in New York City, be sure to check out the permanent set of mosaic murals that she created in the mezzanine of the 34th Street Penn Station subway stop. And from home, you can also experience her work on the gorgeous website, dianaalhadid.com. Of all of her experiences from the past year, however, Diana has shared that one of the most rewarding is the work she's done with the United Nations Refugee Agency to provide assistance to Syrian refugees displaced by violence, conflict, and persecution. We're extremely grateful to have her here, virtually at least, and so In lieu, I guess, of audience applause, I will simply turn it over to you, Diana. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. What a humbling introduction. Thank you for making me extra nervous. So yeah, I haven't done one of these by Zoom to such a large audience of millions I see are present. Okay, so I'm just gonna dive right in because what I decided to do, shall I share screen? Share screen. Okay, I'm in my studio and now we're in my computer. View, present. Okay, is this working? Okay, so we're gonna go to this, I'm gonna start with the show in Georgia, and which is why we're all here. Nothing is stable. It's a succinct little show that I've not seen yet in person, but in terms of seeing all these pieces kind of breathing the same air. So I'm experiencing it like you virtually, and went down a rabbit hole, kind of looking at each of these pieces one by one and how they relate to each other, and how what I thought I would do is kind of look at each piece and trace its sort of lineage, in for lack of a better word. So you come in and see first this work, which is called The Drifter. And by the way, this is going to be completely not chronological. So, and I've never really talked about my work in this way, so it's a little, it will be a lesson for all of us. So this piece is called The Drifter. And I first showed it, I don't have dates in front of me, but I think it might have been 2014. And it's from a body of work in which I was trying to find a new context or a new physics or a new story for each three clay heads that I made, that I made for a series, for a bronze series. But I took each one of these three clay heads and gave them a particular relationship to an existing pedestal that I'd found. And so I basically, I'm starting with this clay head that I made, kind of feeling out, I basically made them each without looking. And then I paired them with a pedestal that was kind of found randomly, maybe from a previous show. I don't even remember where I got them, but they weren't mine to begin with. So I'm kind of thinking as the pedestal is sort of a body of sorts. It's like a stand-in for the head, and it's, you know, meant to support the head. But as you can see, there's this kind of subtle kind of shift, a little drift off of the center. And this is one of the other of these three clay heads that I, you know, kind of built a new context for, a new storyline around. So this one came out of this pedestal. No, this one is called Smoke and Mirrors. And I'm going to keep going so you can see the whole series. This is kind of like a head that burst out of a volcano, I think. And below is this mirror that that was inspired in part by this very strange sculpture that I saw outside the Paris Opera House, where you can see this mirror that's actually carved in stone, and it's, you know, kind of capturing the reflection of the figure beneath. And so this is another work that sort of relates to that piece. It's the only sculpture that I had untitled. And this would be the third of this series of clay head sculptures, you know, where again, I'm kind of starting from the head and using a pedestal and then kind of grafting them together through some new narrative. And some of the narratives come from paintings I'm looking at the time. I look a lot at paintings, strangely, a lot of them from the 14th and 15th century, I found. A lot of them are probably about half of the works that I look at are European in origin, probably about half are from the Islamic Golden Age. So a lot of like miniatures and, well, a lot of the paintings then were miniature, as you'll see. And so for this work called Head in the Clouds, I noticed some of these paintings that were, you know, holding these figures that were holding buildings, these patrons of the building. And you'll see that's another theme that kind of comes up. So going back to the show in Georgia. So there's one of these clay heads that comes from this series on one side of the wall. And on the other side of the wall is the most, let's say, recent in a series of work of a piece called Synonym, which is an editioned work, although they're all unique, you know, they're all handmade in, you know, my studio, and they're not cast exactly, they're all built up additively. Three of them actually lived in Madison Square Park in 2018 for my show Delirious Matter, and they each kind of rested in the peripheral lawns, and I'll tell more about that that work in that space. But I had one that I was keeping for myself, and sometime last year, I guess, after everything was happening, I have actually this whole of last year, I've had a bit of a reckoning with my own past and with my own work, and I've returned to a lot of work that I've made before with a new knowledge and sometimes with a new idea, and so I just decided to paint this one, the one that's in Georgia. It surprised them, I think, when it arrived. I think they weren't expecting to see this kind of colorful one of a kind of the series. So none of the other ones are like this. Okay, so on one side of the wall is one Synonym of this kind of weird colorful one, and on the other side is the piece called Drifter. And they both have, I think, a way of playing or dancing with the pedestal that they're on. This is a recent work also from early last year, early 2020, that is again sort of this next iteration. I think of these as some as kind of, you know, generational, let's say. They have traveled with me now for, you know, over a decade, 15 years or something, some of these parts of pieces. And last year I found fragments of this purple figure that I never used. I was doing this experiment into one of the molds, and I saw the relatedness of this series, this Synonym series, as a kind of opposite to this original purple, this purple figure. And so I sort of, again, grafted them together. I don't know how I don't quite know how to talk about this work, just because it's a very recent, but it's called Self-Delusions. And maybe it has a relationship to another work that I'm thinking of now from a long time ago called Self-Melt, and I think I put it in this presentation. Okay, so back to the show. So those are two sculptures, figurative, one ahead, one, you know, one a bust, I guess, let's say, and the third sculpture is of this foot sculpture. And there are things on the wall, and I'm going to talk about those too. But these bronze feet, I guess I'm going to talk about this first. Yeah, we'll talk about this first. Okay, so pin the bronze feet, and we'll look at what I call, they're sort of paintings, but I call them panels, that's hanging on the wall. This is also from a body of work that has evolved over time, but I think it originated in a sculpture. All of my ideas, I'm not really a painter. I think, well, maybe I am. I don't know. I think a lot of my ideas, in terms of materials, have their origin in a sculpture, an experiment with a material in a sculpture. And that's just to say that these are the same materials that I use for this panel that I use in all of my other sculptures, which is like a kind of polymer gypsum and fiberglass and plaster and metal and anyway. Okay, so I want to tell you about this piece. This panel is called Reflectogram of Two Women, and it's a curious, I like its inclusion in the show because there are these, you know, two figures, you know, a head and a body, and here is the panel where it zooms in. It's actually a painting from that comes from a detail, a X-ray detail, a reflectogram actually, like taken of this painting. You can see these two figures in the front left corner. This is the infrared reflectogram, so you can kind of see the underdrawing of the painting, and I feel like that's something also kind of regular in my work, where I see I like to trace the origin of the process, and it always traces back to drawing, and I love to see the underpaintings and underdrawings, and I make drawings a lot myself. So now we're going to the bronze feet, which is the third sculpture in the round. This is kind of the heel, the sole of the foot. Is that the sole? The sole of the foot pressed against an imaginary boundary. This is called AIT, A-I-T. I think I'm saying it right. Which is a kind of an island that I guess is built up. It's a geological term that is built up over time with sediment. So I work with feet as a sort of sculptural trope, as a way to kind of investigate the material. Like often when I'm making a bronze work, or I'm kind of going in a new direction, I tend to use it as a sort of like a sketchbook, to kind of figure out how to work with patina, how to play with the wax. So this piece is called Immortal Repose, and I think it's from 2009. So it's pretty early work, and you can see the feet, all the hands. So she's kind of self-aware, she's very self-conscious, and the feet at the bottom. So this foot kind of exploration with it always is paired with playing with a new material. These are more recent, but I think the origin of this foot motif thing is as old as this piece, which I made. I don't know. I think it's 05 or 06. I think it's 05, or no, maybe it's I don't know. It's called "Spun of the Limits of My Lonely Waltz," and I think I was 24 and I was just kind of learning how to make molds and put things together, and and I needed a kind of a blueprint, right, to proceed with the work. I put paint on the soles of my feet and danced the waltz, and wherever my feet met the floor, that was where I planted a spire for this cathedral, which is flipped upside down. I just want to go back to that really quick. I had a thought. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is also an important work for me because it implies the body in architecture. It's made to my height and kind of to my scale. It's made by my own body, by dancing, which is not super common, but the body then would start to feature in years later, and you can see, this is a piece called Phantom Limb. So sometimes I guess it's a limb, not just a foot. But these big landscapes that sort of migrate off of the pedestal or off of their plinth and kind of no longer, they're monumental, but they're kind of no longer behaving like a monument in a way. It's kind of floating away. It's receding. The materials are kind of pulled with the figure, almost like she's carrying all the gravity of, that she's got a lot of gravity and she's kind of like pushing everything with her. So sometimes they, I'll make these large installations that have, an anchor in the smaller work, or that the storylines sort of connect. And in fact, this piece, Phantom Limb, was the first time that I made the positive. This figure is the origin of Synonym. I kind of couldn't get rid of it. I went and made a work called Antonym, and I made these other, and then I made Synonyms, and I became very attached to the original, and it was kind of sitting in my studio collecting dust for so long, and it became the origin story for this next big expansive project. So going back to Georgia, this is Synonym, and in the back is this work called Pious Jeans, which, they photograph really differently. They're really hard to photograph. And I like the inclusion of this work in the show because the story of this piece is kind of, it's kind of funny to me. It's a friend of mine who is holding a bronze cast of a face, of a head drawing, right? So this kind of, she's basically holding the top of this sculpture. So holding it to her own head. She's putting another face, a sculpture, in front of her, and she's wearing jeans. So she's, and she's kind of pretending to be a sculpture. She's, pretending to be this pious sculpture. And that's why I think I called it Pious Jeans, because it stands in contrast to this work, whose origin is in this bizarre Hans Memling painting called Allegory of Chastity, which obviously is just a weird painting, not his more well-known paintings, but I have gravitated back to this depiction of a woman kind of encased in a mountain. She's essentially wearing a mountain as a skirt, as her chastity belt. So she's a rock, basically, immobile, but seems kind of in control. She seems also self-aware. I don't take her as a victim. I actually used to imagine that she was kind of plugging a volcano. Again, so thinking about the body as having like this imagined implicit or explicit interiority, and that here this blending of figure and landscape actually becomes sort of like a fortress or a citadel, which is what the name of this work is. So there's a kind of architectural layer, let's say, that's that I felt was important to bring back in. And this work was in the reflecting pool at Madison Square Park, also one of the 6 pieces that was in the show Delirious Matter. So this piece actually also came by way of a drawing. Let me explain the face part, I guess. I made a quick drawing. This is a print actually. Wait, hold on. So I made a quick drawing of this and a big, like almost to scale 10-foot or 12-foot drawing of the mountain. And then traced all of those drawn marks on the wall with steel and extruded them until I had 2 halves of a sketched up, messy, no 2 identical lines kind of structure that was the rock. And then we kind of stitched it all together until it could resist hurricane winds or whatever, until it stopped shaking, I guess. This is a piece that I made as a print for Skowhegan School of Art, which is school it's like a residency that was fantastic. And this was kind of a fundraising effort. So from last year, which was in obviously it was 2020, and I called this piece Hindsight. And so this drawing of these faces features as early as this work called Moving Target, where I'm doing, again, this axial drawing of a head, but from 3 dimensions. So kind of suggesting that it's moving, or as in this case, suggesting that the head, so that piece Citadel from Madison Square Park actually spawned a whole other series of work where I reimagined what would happen when the figure left the mountain, maybe exploded out of the mountain, maybe there was actually a volcanic eruption, who knows, and she drifted into other lands, and now her face is kind of spiraling off and kind of like a slinky connecting to this big bucket of material at the bottom. So it's like this sludge of material. And also this is another work, actually this is the first of that series where she's migrated, and here she's totally shed the mountain, and all she's kept is her very perfectly poised, hands folded. It's a little bit creepy, I think, but and then this is the third one, which was the third in the series of these migrating face drawings. And this is in what's called the Memling Museum, which is a hospital museum. It's an old museum from that has a lot of Hans Memlings in its collection. And what I found very curious about the museum was this big hole in the ground where you could see the original cobblestone from even before Memling's time. And I thought that was such an interesting characteristic. And so what I did was I took this big rug in the front, which is Hans Memling's kind of typical or not typical, but often used rug pattern, this kind of motif that is identifiably a Memling rug, I guess, in a lot of his paintings. So you can see it at the bottom. It's an Orientalist rug, which Memling is naming as his own, and I just found that very interesting. So that was the starting point. And again, putting the head kind of at the top, and then imagining that these threads are kind of coming out of the rug and spiraling into this new mountainous form. Okay, so we're going back to the show again, and this is another theme that comes up often in my work, which is this figure of Gradiva. She's a bas-relief sculpture that has a very interesting story. So it's a kind of contrast with these women that are sort of held in immobile in rocks or in pedestals or wherever, mountains. This is a story of a woman that migrates and is always kind of making people chase her. Actually, it was the story of an archaeologist who becomes fixated with this relief sculpture that he sees and starts to hallucinate her. He's German, but he's on holiday in Italy, and he starts to hallucinate her everywhere in Rome. And then I'm checking the time. Yeah, maybe I'll keep going a little faster. Anyway, so she's an interesting story, and she became a muse for the surrealists and for Freud as well. And she's featured in a number of works. So this is one where Gradiva's in one panel, and it kind of created this hedged in room. And then back to the show in Georgia again, this work, Volcanic Split, kind of speaks to a lot of my work around volcanoes and natural phenomena that were once upon a time mysterious and unknown. I was looking at a lot of these tiny paintings from another illuminated manuscript. This time it was German, but again from the 16th century. I think that's like my sweet spot. And this was a book called the Book of Miracles, and they just showed all of these bizarre events like weird solar phenomenon. And for example, this one's I think it's a sundog, which is like a perihelio, which I saw with my own eyes without the sword. But it's basically it's basically this effect that happens when I think there are like ice particles suspended in the air at around dusk, when suddenly it'll appear that there are three suns in the sky, and there's a giant rainbow that encircles the three suns. And I saw it on at our house, and it floored me. And so anyway, see, this show has so many branches. It feels like almost every work in the show has speaks to some ongoing theme or another in my work. And this is a pretty abridged, presentation, but this is a small drawing that I make. I make a lot of these on Mylar. And this one was inspired by this work, which is also a 16th century painter is a Bosnian Muslim who put this book together. It was one of the first books that only looked at architecture and the flora and fauna as he kind of traced his path along with the campaign of the Ottoman military campaign. So went, from Aleppo, which is where what he painted here, and then went to all the suburbs in Turkey and various places in Iraq. And so you see these depictions of the lands and the towns and the suburbs and the trees and the plantings through the eyes of this miniaturist. So super interesting. So yeah, so when I saw this, I knew that it was Aleppo, which is where I was born in Syria. And, it's a big citadel, which is in my work, I think as long ago as my very early work, where I was looking at the depictions of the Tower of Babel. Again, this is a 16th century, Peter Bruegel Tower of Babel, which, I love the story, but I love even more the paintings. And so in response to that painting, I made this sculpture, which is called, this is Self-Melt, which, was kind of my work around towers and citadels. And then most recently, I kind of consider this in the same thematic vein. This is the Punjab archive in Lahore, Pakistan, where I did a pretty major, it's actually my biggest project, but it came from this teeny tiny drawing. And it ended up looking like this. So it's kind of a translation of this archive where it was rumored that there was a woman buried alive as ordered by the Mughal emperor at the time, because she was having an illicit affair with his son, with the crown prince. And her name was Anarchy. She's a very famous, her story is very famous. There's a lot of like movies and just kind of all over the region. It's a well-known, very well-known story. But I was fascinated to learn that she was sentenced to death by being buried in a wall. And, I have this thing about permeable walls and figures in architecture and in landscapes, so it was, I was captivated by her story. And this is these marble cuttings that I found in surplus and kind of some of the kind of industrial area of Lahore. And I also happened upon this incredible cemetery, and I thought I would bring her tomb. So this is called the Escape of Anarchy. So I kind of took the building that she was rumored to, it was kind of a cenotaph, and she was rumored to have been there, but no one knows if her body was there. And I brought her to this location by way of a drawing, right? By way of like a quick sketch, like exploded, oversized big sketch, but it landed in the Lahore fort, which is where supposedly her sentencing was announced. This is a shot of it at night. I think that's it. I think I've come just under time. That was a lot. Is anyone there?
I'm here. I'm coming back in. Hi, I'm rejoining, and let me see. Yeah, Susan and Cynthia are back. Rejoining because we have lots of questions. And
yeah,
so
I noticed some numbers going up. So
yeah, if you feel up for transitioning into Q&A, I think we have.
Let's do that.
Great. So
or what should I do?
I'll read them out loud to you.
Okay.
And that way, when the video is archived and closed captioned, the Q&A will be
perfect.
Will be shareable. So the first question is from Chantel Curry, who says, I'm a Lebanese Canadian painter in my last year of a rigorous MFA program. The faculty still operates under a strong paradigm of the Western canon. Did you ever have to negotiate or compromise your heritage in your work? If so, what would you tell your former self?
Mhm. Wow. I can't think of a time where I compromised myself or my work, in that way, or my work. I can't think of a time, but I think I know where, just to the deeper point, I guess. Yes, I too grew up in the West, and so always learned about, my heritage, or didn't learn about it through this Western education. I've been working to kind of fill in the gaps. And I think, I mean, when I was young, I I didn't I wasn't, I didn't want to be a spokesperson. I don't want to feel like I was a spokesperson for any group. So I really, I kind of looked at my identity and my heritage and my, it's such a complex thing. Like, I think to begin, I really resisted it because I didn't want, I resisted working with it publicly because I didn't want, um, to be, I didn't want to be stereotyped. And I also felt it was personal. It wasn't something that everyone needed to have access to, right? How I was kind of, seeing how I fit into the world, where, what my stories were. And in a lot of ways, because I grew up, educated, with, modernist professors and postmodernist theory, and, at the dawn of the digital revolution, and solidly, in Ohio, in the Midwest. And so I wasn't, I wasn't in a I felt like that was also my history, right? So the Western canon is my history because that's what I learned, because I moved to America and I live, I'm an American. And, so the early years, I was like, this is mine too. And I still believe this is mine too. And it's all open source. So anyone has access to any of these paintings, for reference. And so I started to look back at, my Islamic heritage, or my, history, the history of my country, you know, progress, in time. I did a lot of work with Al-Jazari. Actually, that was, that first water thief work was, 2011. But before that, I did like it's something that now I feel like is much more integrated and well balanced. And I love learning about unexpected intersections between those cultures. Like when I learned about, for example, that there was a church in Spain that wasn't, a cross plan, but was a, square plan, it was because it was, transformed from a mosque. And I love learning about those weird anomalies or aberrations in between this culture that is in some ways very, very close, because it was my first language. Arabic's my first language. And I grew up in a, Arabic Muslim household. And also very distant. So, I visited Syria a number of times, like, not very often, not obviously in recent years. The last time was, I think, grad school or just before. So it's been many years, but my summers there were, some of the most memorable of my life. I'm on a tangent. You want to go to the next question? I don't know if I answered that, but.
Yeah, she says, thank you for your thoughtful answer.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So the next question is one that has been asked a couple of different ways. This one is from Jonathan Bolton. He says, sorry if you've answered this question 1,000 times, But is your polymer gypsum a pre-mixed material, or do you add a polymer to reduce the brittleness? A couple of other people asked in the chat about your material, about the
Yeah, so polymer gypsum, it's a two-part mix. It's like a sculpture material. I give it the general name because there are a lot of companies that do similar type of thing, and so I'm not about like promoting any one like company. It's sort of like the Kleenex and tissue thing, like, you know, it's kind of the brand name is the thing. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it's just a two-part mix. Like it's you know, the way that I do this process is my own invention, and it's all the same. You know, they're all the same materials in a sense that that you might find, you know, for architectural restoration, or all my materials are very basic. They're plaster, they're steel, they're metals. So within that, cast or not cast, what's it called? Whatever. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm like racing. So they're either cast or forged, or their gold leaf, or their silver leaf, or there's a lot of different kinds of metals that I use. There's a lot of different kinds of plasters that I use. I use simple raw plaster a lot. I use clay, oil-based, water-based. I use foams here and there. So 2-part spray. I use all of these materials that are part of our contemporary industrial culture, material culture, as well as materials that are as old as bronze and stone. And I find that very important to me. This history of the materials is part of what gets me thinking, right? Like we have certain materials that you know, Renaissance painters and sculptors didn't have, or even before, you know, like there are so many new combinations that I think are very interesting. Like there's a lot of bronze here. You can see this is a cast. This is a cast strip. Are you guys able to see the like arrow that I'm moving around on my screen? Okay. Anyway, does that answer it? Cardboard, I use a lot of cardboard. Let me try to get to the beginning of this slide. See, this is a new thing that I did too. I put this little, or I asked them to do it for me. Just put this little bit of cardboard underneath. I don't know why.
That's a good segue into the next question. Jonathan says, thank you so much. I'm a broke undergrad, so I'm desperately looking for hydrocal.
Hey, that's great. I mean, also, I should say that I made a lot of work using paper plates for many years. So being a broke undergrad, you know, I graduated into a lot of these, you know, more slightly more expensive materials, but I find so many materials, like the pedestals are found, the foam, you know, half the foam that I find is found, like it's just garbage that I pick up and use. So
well, that's it's good that I think the slide that you're on right now is a great place to start, because in talking to Susan, I heard some things about this particular work that I think tie into this question. So the next question is from Kirsten Stahl, who says, curious if you build some of the pieces in your studio and then finish them in the museum or gallery space. Do the pieces ever change from your original conception based on the scale, the size, or the tenor of the installation space?
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I should say that I have a very, very open original conception. It's only been like a handful of times where I kind of see this thing I want made, and it pretty much, you know, like I remember thinking about an upside down cathedral once, for example, but otherwise they stray a lot. And a lot of the work that I showed is is pretty, it's pretty fixed. Like I make all of it in the studio, except for I don't have a foundry. So the foundry stuff goes to the foundry and comes back here, and then I work with it here. But where was I going with that? But yeah, so yeah, it's all kind of locked together like a giant puzzle, or not so giant puzzle, but this last year I've just been intervening on a lot of stuff. So, I mean, I'll always tweak it a little bit. Or I'll just, hold something back and then I'll change it, like that one synonym. I thought that was over, and I knew that one was going to Georgia and I just really wanted to paint over it. So I don't know. It's there are times where I do the installation. Actually, this one piece I did, well, the most recent piece in Oslo, I installed a lot of it on site, and that was fun. That was a revelation. It's really hard to do this out of order. I'm sorry. Anyway, should we do another question?
Organic, yeah. This question is from Grace Harpster. She says, I'm interested in your interest in the hyper-detailed nature of 15th and 16th century Northern European painting, as well as Ottoman miniatures, especially because your work can be so monumental. Can you speak to the problem of scale and how you approach that in your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a great question. I do think that there's an inner miniaturist somewhere inside. Like I think when I was in high school and it was, my battery's gonna die, so I'm gonna move you guys with me to charge. So unprofessional. So I used to draw with excruciating precision and very, very detailed, obsessive, one little hair at a time. And it wasn't, I don't think it was very healthy, let's say, when I was young. So my love for those kinds of intimate experiences is not gone. I love to see the surface of a paint. I love to kind of, notice how an artist's hand has moved through, centuries later. It's still there. And I actually think, they look so monumental, and they are. They're, a lot of them are quite big, but when you come up close, you also you can see my hand. You can see my marks, you can see all the paint, you can see every decision up close. So I think there are ways to zoom in and out of each work. And I also, I think in some ways, because those paintings tell stories that are so broad, whereas, I would hesitate to, make a direct reference to like Oldenburg or something, or like a more modern artist, because it just hasn't been enough time for me to just totally destroy their work. I don't know. Like I just, the references that I start with, they just let me put this in. They just they really barely remain by the end. But I tell you guys these stories anyway, just because, I don't know, I'm here, so. But they're not, it's not so crucial that someone walks away thinking, well, I just saw, 15th century miniature in the sculpture. I don't know. That's just what got me there. Yeah, I think their use of their spaces are so fascinating. I love awkward perspectives, and I love kind of trying to find that individual, very personal, kind of eccentric notation that the painters were able to kind of hide on the edges of their canvases, their artworks in some ways, where, you know, maybe they had to stay to a rigid theme, you know, this has to be a deposition, this has to be a crucifixion, this has to be whatever, to tell this story because of some commission or whatever. But they found ways to kind of veer, you know, or leave their individual mark. And I'll probably never get tired of looking at them. I also, yeah, I mean, they're like treasures too, because you know, Islamic miniatures are very hard to see. You know, they don't take up that much space in a museum. You have to make a special appointment, and you know, they stay under close guard for so long. And I think that can be very a you know, beautiful interaction with the work.
I just because I'm here, and I just want to respond and say that you know, another interesting thing about experiencing your work in person versus the way that it photographs, which I find your work photographs in a really beautiful and compelling way, but just completely different from the way that it looks in person, shockingly different.
Yeah.
It very interesting in both kind of ways, right? But even though your sculpture and the wall works are very large scale, I often find myself like wanting to get really close, like really get my face up to it in a way that something of that scale would normally kind of push you back. You know, the details of the surface share so much of that kind of intimacy of scale with, you know, the smaller paintings and miniatures, just because of the way that the material operates.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a hard time giving my work up. I mean, I just yeah, I am very close to it. As big as they are, yeah.
Yeah, they reward of kind of up close looking too.
Thank you.
So the next question is from Rebecca Dimling Cochran, who asks, can you talk a bit about your palette? There's obviously a lot of white in the sculptures, but the paintings seem to have metallic colors underneath, and the drawings have a lot of blue. Does this go back to your original inspiration of the work, or is it more personal?
It's probably more personal, I guess, if or maybe more like my temperament that day. But they're actually more colorful than they might seem. It's just a lot of the white. I guess I don't use very like super bright or fluorescent or a lot of like pop colors, or all my colors are a little bit, you know, they're not distinct. They're kind of layered. All of my work is like kind of muddled and layered, you know. I mean, there's it's all built by there's, you know, layer upon layer of material or color or, you know, paint or varnish or gold leaf or plaster. Oh, I work back and forth between transparent materials and opaque materials, although I don't use a lot of glass except for the mosaic, I guess, technically. But I think I because I don't think at my core I'm a painter. I tend to you know, I tend to embed the color in the material. So I don't use a lot of the colors that you see are pigmented gypsums. So they're not, you know, paint applied over a surface, but it's kind of integrated into the material. And so a lot of the metals are the same. I've been really into patinas recently because it's so magical and such an incredible process. So I patina all of the materials. I mean, you can see this is actually bronze rod on this work that we're looking at. So there's a little bit of a cast bronze drawing head at the top, but then there's a lot of just like raw lines. They're probably more colorful when you get up close to them. But I do tend towards blues and greens, I think I should say.
So let's see. So we have, I mean, arguably we have more questions than we'll be able to get to. The next question comes from Ann Coddington, who asks, can you talk about how your pieces dissolve at times and almost disappear, and what that means for you?
Yeah, I think that it's such a, I make things in such a backwards seeming way. They do look like they are, you know, kind of dissolving, and but they're actually built up tiny bit by tiny bit. So there's never an occasion, or almost like 1% of the time, where I'll have a thing and I'll break into it, right? So just so that people get the process, it's really all additive. Like I made a mold and I cast into it and I use those parts. I use a lot of cardboard, aluminum foil to build all of these kind of forms, these landscapes, this like kind of sinuous material through all of the, you know, more the more solid objects. But I think to the point, to her point, that I tend not to close my forms off. I mean, as of yet, I tend to like to see through my forms. So I think it's about generating more space than there may seem. So the more, you know, the more parts that I add, I'm kind of trying to build more space. I'm taking up space. I'm creating space, but maybe, or I don't know if taking up space is correct, because it's not enclosed, right? So there's something for me about being able to make all of this available, top, bottom, inside, outside. I think, except for the head at the top, which is the one kind of exception, the very important exception to the rule, and the leg at the bottom of this sculpture, for example, everything else suggests porousness. And I had a hard time with the pedestals here because they're such solid things, but they kind of had to be to carry all of this. It's this big cantilever. There's a lot of metal structure under this that's holding all this together. So, so yeah, my impulse for whatever reason was to suggest by adding that mass is maybe not that stable. Going back to our show title, that these things move, and you know, and in some ways that's a reflection of the materials that I work with themselves, because all of the materials, because I start with raw materials, it's a powder and it's a liquid, right? So you're aware, or I'm aware of that transformation where it starts as a static solid thing, and then it liquefies, and it can liquefy into another solid object, or you might see the spill. So that's why I think so often there's this kind of dripping, because there is a drip that does come from a material that I painted that dripped over something that I then reinforced. So you're actually kind of witnessing that moment in time, let's say.
Well, we have a practical question that has been sort of seconded and thirded. There's a lot of curiosity about the logistics of how you move and install these works. And I have to admit that having been a curator for years, I'm also sensitive to this question, that many of your works have this kind of sense of impossibility of how they exist in the space, how they would have gotten to the space. And of course, anyone who's ever shipped their own art or received art shipped from others. Yeah, I mean, even simple things are not so simple when you're shipping them and trying to get them inside of space. And your work seems particularly challenging. Yeah, however you'd like to maybe take that on, I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing you kind of talk a bit about.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, the part that's complicated about them is just their volume.
Mhm.
You know, so other than figuring out how to get it through a door and how to, you know, but they're experts that create work, and you know, they've traveled around the world several times, and a lot of these, so they've been installed by crews that aren't me, and they seem to do a pretty excellent job every time. Um, i- I think I'm just kind of crafty about where the parts break down. I sort of enjoy the engineering problems. And I'm kind of make my own bolts and accessories that connect them. So like my own tabs, my own, all the hardware is kind of super custom, right? They have to fit within an inch, you know, all of these things have, you know, they're rigid. And that's a one other constant thing too. I don't think I've worked very often with materials that remain soft. They're almost always rigid, like kind of fossilized. And I don't think I've ever, I mean, I've used soft materials, but then they harden. So I kind of like them to stay where I put them. I think is my little bit of a controlling thing, maybe. But yeah, I guess they're complicated, but you know, they only move, you know, they're not, you know, they move around. People, I don't know, people move houses, right? Like people do really crazy things. Um, and the
So,
panels, the things that look extremely fragile, you know, they're not, because you know, they were in Madison Square Park for the whole summer, and you know, they have to be as strong as buildings to be allowed to stand there. There's 60 some thousand people a day walking through that park, so you know, it's still art. Like, I don't like want people just like palming them, I guess, but you know, they would handle it. I guess it's like anything needs to just be properly maintained and treated. And
so their fragility is
they're not that fragile. They're
illusion.
not fragile. They're not fragile. I don't think the most fragile thing probably are my drawings, you know, because they would just, if you blow on them, you know, or if you smudge, you know, if they're not behind glass, then those can actually change. I guess if you're touching the bronze, you know, it wouldn't, you know, that wouldn't be good, I guess, but they're protected in some ways. I'm also very kind of, you know, the most recent body of work, I'm kind of reveling in, you know, it was actually ever since I took the work outdoors in such a public way, that I really relaxed my feelings about the changeability of the work. That I started to feel like, you know, as if if a part of it breaks, that's a problem. If there's a structural break, but if it's just living and breathing the air that we're in, and it absorbs some of that air into its, you know, into its skin, and you know, maybe that gypsum kind of changes a little bit. That's part of its life. Like, I'm not, um I'm actually in some cases exaggerating that chemistry or that oxidization by combining materials that I hope will cause the patina to change or spill into the gypsum and make some, you know. So I'm more recently like really excited about that the work can kind of that it can kind of live among us, right? Not be just in this gallery space and protected. And yeah. How did that come up? It's really hard to see the questions. I'm hoping to open them, but I can't figure it out.
Well, I'll read another one for you. There's one from Kimberly Gladfelter Graham that that says it's oh, it just moved. Hang on. It's great to hear you talk about your materials and process. It's a favorite part of studio visits, the smells and textures and activity. I'm curious to ask about notions of migration in relationship to place. You've talked about it in referencing Aleppo and the influences of East and West, but there are broader ideas of being grounded or drifting or migrating. Could you talk about, could you speak to that thread specifically, and also your personal work with refugees?
Well, I should just say my personal work with the refugees is just been a couple years, and so I don't want to give myself to, you know, we're working on an auction, and I'm anyway, it's a separate part of my life that, I mean, I don't know, is anything separate? I don't know, but it has. My being an immigrant obviously is something that shapes everything in my understanding of the world, right? Like you can't kind of escape your own story, your own history, right? So but it's interesting to think about how sometimes the work that we do in the studio may or may not be a kind of expression of some metaphor or some articulation of a problem in the safe space of the studio that might be expressed in metaphorical terms or some other terms that you can't maybe control outside the studio, or you can't fully understand outside the studio because you don't have that much power. So certainly, growing up in some ways as, with the kind of societal restrictions that all women grow up with in, maybe more some places than others, where you're meant to be quiet, or we're meant to be small. There's this kind of a lot of like, a lot of work, a lot of effort to keep women, I mean, this is old news. But it's kind of in everything, right? It's in like, women have to stay very small physically, very small expressively, very small emotionally, very small. So I can certainly imagine like that I would have had in internalizing that world, reacted to it with these big, monstrous sized, complex, because in the studio, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can respond or not respond to those expectations or those pressures. And you can do it directly or indirectly. And so I wonder if as I'm getting older, I'm like, okay, there is something real. For example, we talked about this a little bit, Sarah, when we met before. Like, there's something to be said about generational trauma, right? Like, I'm learning this, from millennials, really, that there was, or and also from the generations ahead of me, where I'm like, in some ways, I'm totally cut off from this, country that I was born in. It's interesting. My son is now the same age that I was when I moved to America. And, I get nervous moving him, from one friend group to another, like, or one playground, you know, it's, so that's not even generational trauma. That's just my own, you know, old trauma. So certainly I can imagine that, you know, you can't, like I said, you can't escape who you are or where, you know, but you're always managing how much of that you want to internalize or decode or understand or bring forward or debate with or argue against or celebrate. And that's just up to you and your temperament. So I've been fluctuating my whole life between, you know, different attachments I have to my own personal history and my own identity and my own migratory spirit. And so I think I gravitate to some of these stories that are kind of cross-cultural, where you learn about other you know, women that are making similar efforts from eons ago. Yeah, I think I went on a tangent again.
It was a great tangent. I mean, thank you.
I don't remember what the question was. It was about migration, I think.
Yeah, it was about yeah, I think you got there. And
Okay.
I
Harder for me to talk about that than it is to have someone else write about it, because that's part of the interpretive element of looking at work. And so me offering this reflection is sort of like me trying to interpret my work from the outside, but inside, you know, I don't know. I would love to hear their thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, so we have time for one more question, and I want to if our audience will indulge me, I'd like to ask a question of you myself. That is one that I told you I would ask you when we spoke.
I don't remember.
We've got about 9 minutes left, so it can be a short answer, or it can be an 8-minute answer. But this talk is coinciding with an issue of Art Papers that's focusing on artists who have been making interventions into either the aesthetic space or the political space of monuments or memorials.
Right.
And while I recognize, I wouldn't say that your work is like an on the nose participation in that that discourse, which in some cases is really literal for artists. They're proposing literal actual monuments to either tell stories that have been suppressed or to critique the position or the role of monuments in our culture in general. Your work does really clearly participate in those kinds of the aesthetic languages, the material languages of monuments, of memorials, of those forms, those kind of classical forms that get taken up, like, monumental fountains. And, it's in that space, even if it's not maybe necessarily about being in that space. And so I wonder if you could talk about how you see your work's relationship to that aesthetic space, or the socio-political role of those kinds of objects, or maybe even more specifically, like within the last year, the kind of surge of contestation around that space.
Well, yeah, it is interesting because in the shift in conversation about monuments most recently in the past by 5-6 years, I've my work is monumental in in its largest form. It's monumental. I also, like I said, make small work and have very small elements, but when I look at monuments, I just see these tropes, right? Like, or when I look at even in paintings, like the woman in repose on a pedestal, right? That's one of the oldest, sculptural tropes is, but for me, the specificity of the figure, what I'm is less important. I'm interested in inverting that typology or doing something with it that has you looking on the inside of that trope or that sculpture. And also, you know, my work hasn't yet memorialized an event. There are maybe implied events or actions against my work or inside my work, but they tend to be more reflections on these broader societal tropes. Let's say, how often do you see women in art, and who's making them, who's making those forms, who's putting them out in the public. You know, I think that in working with that tradition, you're always working, you're working with that history of sculpture and monumental. But yeah, I mean, I made a work, it's not in here, called Cenotaph for Two. And for me, my monuments are always, you know, there's not like one clear, heroic figure. The pedestal and the figure are always really interlinked. They're like, they lock together. So the pedestal and the context and the frame and the periphery and the, you know, is part of it. It's all, you know, it's to kind of reemphasize it, that to see it together. That's why I think I return to the pedestal so often, because that's the part that anchors it to the earth, to the ground that it's on. That's the part that that's the footing, right? I think that is just as crucial a conversation to have. But yeah, this work, Cenotaph for Two, you know, it's more of like a memorial of a story, not so much of a specific person. So a cenotaph is like a kind of a grave site or a memorial site where the body is not there. It's either, you know, to honor an army or a group of people. So there isn't one figure, or the body is displaced, as in the story of Anarchy. So I find those stories really much more compelling. And I also, you know, I think monuments, like everything, like all art, is, you know, that they change with the you know, the current in the air. They change with the wind, right? So, you know, when one story becomes, you know, overtold, or a certain narrative is not, you know, is coming from a position of power that should be questioned, it, you know, it's fair game. I have no history is constantly, you know, it's not static either, right? It's constantly being reinvented and reevaluated. It's only history, you know, based on who's telling that story. So I don't know if I said that right. I'm struggling with words right now, but yeah, I don't know.
We've had you talking for a long time, so we can.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm
do a break, but and at this point, I think Susan's rejoining us. Cynthia's, I think, was going to rejoin us, and yeah, we just.
Can I do a stop share of my screen?
Yeah, if you want. Although that's lovely if you want to keep it. We just wanted to all kind of come back on so that you could see our faces, and and yeah.
Here we all are. Sorry, I did stop.
Here we all are. Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you to our audience who have, you know, been present and asked a lot of really great questions. Thank you so much, Diana.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Now I can see everyone's questions. Sorry.
We could keep you here all night, but we won't do that to you.
Well,
Diana.
thank you all for all of you millions of viewers out there. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you, and hopefully we'll see each other again soon in person.
You have a lot of fans in Atlanta.
Yay! I love Georgia right now so much. I love Georgia right now so much. All love for Georgia.
Well, Georgia loves you, and
Right.
thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
All right, amazing. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Bye, everyone.